First and foremost, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself. So my name is Kolade Nurse. I'm a member of the Chamber's new Digital Society Subcommittee of the Chamber of Commerce. And I would like to welcome you to our first BIMTECH event, which will be hopefully the first of many such events with the Chamber and its members to discuss the issues of ICT and digital and as they would impact our market and our region. So we have a very good agenda for you today. So before I go into what that agenda is, I want to take a very brief moment to make sure that I welcome the minister who I will have to welcome again, and that is the Senator, the Honorable Kay McConney, Minister of Innovation and Smart Technology. Rodney Taylor is here as well, and Rodney is the head of the Data Processing Department. We have our sponsors for today, Cable and Wireless Business and JP Marshall Associates, and we have representatives from both, Jensen Sylvester and Bruce Lee. Bruce's name is the one that I couldn't forget. Also, I would like to welcome officials from the European Union and their delegation for the Eastern Caribbean states, OECS, CARICOM, and CARIFORM. I also would like from our leadership within the Chamber to welcome Alison Brown Ellis, who is the VP of the Chamber, as well as Susan Boyer, who is the chair of our Digital Society Committee, as well as our other representatives who are here as well. I would also like to welcome and thank the media for their attendance, and obviously, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. So very quickly, as I mentioned before, we have a pretty straightforward agenda for you today. We will start with opening remarks from Susan Boyer, who will give a bit of an overview of the mandate and the role of the subcommittee, what we hope to achieve, and how we expect to add value to the Chamber's operations. We will then go into a discussion and presentation by the minister, who will, as is stated there, will speak about the vision for digital Barbados. What does that mean? We would have heard from the Prime Minister last week a very arousing budget speech that had a number of things, which clearly would have been underpinned by the use of digital technology as a supporting enabler. So we hope to get a bit of detail around how the government will transform itself through the use of technology to improve doing business within the country, which I think is still rather remains one of the things on the tip of the tongues of many Barbadians. That will be followed by a plenary discussion where you'll be able to ask questions and garner some answers. We will have a brief break, which will then be followed by a discussion being led by the European Union with regards to GDPR. I know for a lot of businesses within the Barbadian space, GDPR remains one of those things that we don't fully understand. What does it mean for us? Are we going to be penalized if we are not in compliance? And what do we need to do to get into the right kind of position to be in compliance? So we always believe that this discussion would have been pertinent and timely. So we hope to have a good discussion around that as well. So let me go ahead and invite Susan to come to speak and provide her remarks. So very quickly, for those who know Susan, Susan was appointed to the position of Vice President Vice President Business Relationship Management in a strategic capacity in 2016 within Sagicor. In this position, Susan is responsible for providing strategic insights, stimulating innovation, shaping business demand, and ensuring business value is realized from information technology. Ms. Boyer has over 20 years' experience in insurance and financial services and served as Vice President, Shared Services, Information Technology for over 13 years. She has been instrumental in the establishment of Technology Shared Services operations during 2002, which within the organization continues to provide varying services to entities across the Sagicor financial group of companies. Susan graduated with an honors degree in mathematics and computer science and has attained her MBA with distinction from the University of West Indies KFL campus. She was also awarded the Fellow of Life Management Institute, and in 2018 attained the Business Relationship Management Professional designation from from the BRM Institute, where she is an active member and is a member of the BRMI Council. Susan has also trained in negotiation strategies from Wharton School of Business and has certifications in project management and governance of information technology. In 2008, she was asked to chair the newly established subcommittee, the Digital Society of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She serves on the Technology Council as well and sits on the Operational Leaders Roundtable of LOMA, one of the largest trade associations in the US insurance industry. Susan is passionate about coaching and mentoring other women, especially in STEM, and is proud of the successes these women whom she has promoted and awarded since her involvement with her and what they've achieved. So I'd like to very quickly thank my esteemed leader, Susan, to give her opening remarks. Thank you. Please welcome her.
Good morning, everyone. Acknowledging that all protocols have already been established, it is my pleasure to be here this morning to welcome you to our breakfast event titled BIMTECH. And thank you for taking this morning out of your day to be here with us. BIMTECH is the first ICT event hosted and conceptualized by the Digital Society Committee of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Our hope is that by the end of the seminar, each participant feels more knowledgeable about the role he or she can play to help in transforming the Barbadian landscape to one that is fully digital and smart. Your presence here today shows us that as a nation, we all recognize the benefits of a Barbadian society that is more efficient and technologically advanced. We look forward to a fruitful discussion as we move our Barbados forward to becoming recognized as a leader in the region and synonymous with a fully digital society. Barbados is developing a digital strategy or policy at a time when our trade and industries need to look for new markets to ensure growth and to help bring economic stability and increase growth to our nation as quickly as possible. We are also lagging in our efficiency efforts as a country, especially at a time when the ecosystem around us is rapidly advancing. Let us, of course, not take our eyes off the fact that digital transformation can bring some disruption, as seen this past year with the European Union's introduction of the General Data Protection Regulation Directives, or GDPR, as it is most commonly referred, which includes hefty fines to be paid by companies that are not compliant. And you will hear more about this later this morning. And let's not also forget the increase in cyber threats. The more digitally oriented and engaged we become, our efforts on mitigating cyber threats become more real and required. This shift from our current methods of doing business will cause some market disturbance. And for this reason, the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry understands the importance of working closely with policymakers and other stakeholders. So what is the Digital Society Committee? The Digital Society Committee is one of 9 subcommittees of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry. These committees were formed in accordance to the rules of the Chamber, which state that the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industries Council will appoint standing committees and such other special committees which are desirable and necessary. The committee was formed in the latter half of last year in 2018, and I'm certain that you will endorse that it is necessary considering the plans of the Barbados government as indicated in the manifesto and more recently in the budget, and understanding the need for us all to remain relevant in today's fast-paced digital world. The committee currently has 7 members from companies within the Barbados private sector, and we have been working diligently over the last months in establishing an effective working framework and developing a plan of action to carry out our mandate. So what is this mandate of the Digital Society Committee? Well, as part of its function, the committee seeks to review the national policy on ICT and recommend positions on its development and use in Barbados, serve as a vehicle for ongoing dialogue between the ICT members of the Chamber and the public sector, and direct our focus on policies that foster entrepreneurship and new ways to translate great ideas into value added. As a second mandate, the Digital Society is also responsible for ensuring that the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry ICT's infrastructure is scaled up, is efficient, it's modern, it's secure, and ready to improve the level of output from the Secretariat, and of course, to effectively operate in a digital society. You would agree that by engaging in these processes as we carry out our mandate as a Digital Society Committee, that we can help, we can be involved, we can be a part of the government's plans to reduce inefficiencies in the government's processes, thereby increasing competitiveness, growth, and productivity, as well as build the resilience of the Barbados private sector. The Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry and its Digital Society Committee have been maintaining close linkages with the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology to ensure that Barbados makes this transition in as smooth a process as possible as the nation makes this shift to a more digital society. It is my pleasure, therefore, to introduce our guest speaker this morning, Senator the Honorable Kay McConney, Minister of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology. Senator the Honorable Kay McConney is the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology of the Government of Barbados. The Ministry's mandate is to lead the modernization of the public service and to create a sustainable, enabling environment for a vibrant digital economy and a digitally intelligent society. Described by She Caribbean magazine as a dynamo moving the region forward, Minister McConney has championed the interests of Barbados, the Caribbean, and small vulnerable economies internationally. Minister McConney is a former high-level diplomat at the United Nations, a former negotiator at the World Trade Organization, and a former Consul General in Canada. In 2017, the University of the West Indies honored Kay McConney in Toronto with the Vice Chancellor's Award for her outstanding contribution to the advancement of the Caribbean's region's interest internationally. Before returning home to Barbados in 2018 to take on the role of Senator and Minister of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology, she headed for the last decade a company that specialized in leading strategic change in the 21st century environments. In addition, Minister McConney has been an expert consultant for various capacity building initiatives in the Caribbean, funded by international development agencies. Some of her work in international development has been published by the European Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kay McConney.
Good morning. Ms. Alison Brown Ellis, Vice President of the Chamber, other council members, Ms. Susan Boyer, who is the Chair of the Digital Societies Committee, members of the Chamber, distinguished guests, media, ladies and gentlemen. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. And I first want to applaud the Chamber for the initiative it has taken in organizing this particular conversation with our private sector and government, because it is important that we all be focused in the same direction on a digital Barbados. And I thank you all for inviting me to participate. I think this invitation, at least the way I take it, is a recognition of the necessity for the government and the private sector and the third sector as well to collaborate in moving this country, this economy, and our citizens from now to next. And what is next? Barbados is heading into a digitally empowered future. It is a future that travels on a highway of connectivity, of innovation, of technology, and of talent. And I have been asked this morning to articulate for you the government's vision as it relates to a digital economy. And it's something that makes me pretty excited. Because this government, are you hearing me well? Because this government, as you know, long before the election bells tolled last year, had started the process of consultation with sectors across this country so that we could determine together how we can build the best Barbados together. And this theme of building the best Barbados together, you will notice that it crept into the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party, and the conversations that we would have started continue unabated. And I don't just want to say that, I want to share with you how that has happened. My ministry, the MIST for short, Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, if you can never remember all of those words, just remember MIST. We have been mandated, as you would have heard Ms. Boyer say, we have been mandated to lead the modernization of the public service and to create an enabling and sustainable environment for our transition to a digital economy and to raising a digitally intelligent society. And in so doing, we have continued the conversation with the private sector and with the nonprofit sector and with NGOs as well. And we now have working groups that are working with they have either started already or some are starting within the next 3 weeks to work on critical areas to us laying the foundation for building the best Barbados together. As you know, we cannot start where we want to end. We have to start at the beginning. And there's a significant amount of foundational work that has to happen now to make sure that we go a little slower now so that we can go a little faster later as we start to put the services of government online. So I'm going to name some of those working groups, and it's important for me to name those because we're going to be reaching out to some of you who are not yet on those working groups. Some of you already are, but others of you who are not on those working groups, we are going to be reaching out to you to be part of helping us to build out the vision for Barbados. There is the telecommunications working group. Connectivity is critical to where we need to go. And there is significant need for telecommunications, reform of the Telecommunications Act so that we build the kind of telecommunications environment where there is competition, where the quality of service is what we need it to be, where we have speed, where we have access, it's affordable and it's reliable. And so that telecommunications working group will be working on reforming the telecommunications, area of telecommunications that will ensure that the highway on which we will travel into that digital future is really one that works for us all. There's also the cybersecurity working group. It is important that we be able to keep Barbados safe in the cyber world. And indeed, we recognize that this cannot be an effort that is only about government looking at its digital assets and data and protecting its data, but we have to have a national response in the event that there's an incident that affects our systems as we go forward. And so it is not just for cybersecurity a government response. It has to be a national response where we bring on board the private sector and our NGOs in creating a national cybersecurity incidents response team. And so those of you who are not yet there, we will, of course, be inviting you to be a part of that. And then, of course, a critical part is our national digital identity. One of the things we have heard our people complain about and our businesses complain about is that you go from one agency to another to do any number of business, any number of different things that you need to do with business, with government. and you have to provide the same information over and over and over again, and to access government services, it creates a problem. We are seeking to make that a little bit easier, and one of the ways in which we are going to do that is through the institution of a national digital ID, which we recognize now may very well have to be a mobile ID as well. Again, government is not seeking to do that alone. Government needs to do that, and we need to do it as one country, public, private, and others together. And there is also the National IT Policy Working Group, and that is another group that we will be working on. And as I said, all of these groups, either some have started or will be within the next 3 weeks. Additionally, the Ministry of Finance is also leading in collaboration with MIST, other government agencies, the private sector, including our banks and our credit unions, etc., a move towards creating a single digital payment system for the country. Those consultations and collaborations have already started, and we are expecting that you will hear some very important announcements within the next month as to how we will be able to move this country as cashless as possible, and how we will be able to eliminate checks within government, including for welfare and other social services. So that is on the horizon. The teams are working, and we are looking forward to being able to deliver some important services to you in that way very soon. So collectively, we are shaping the vision of a smart Barbados. And if I were to encapsulate that evolving vision in a simple way, I would say that we are moving towards a modern Barbados that is globally connected, that is competitive in a digital space, where our people treat the world as our business, and our business is the world. That is as succinctly as I can put it at this stage. And so this is the future on which we have set our sights. You may call it a vision, I call it the inspiration for our transformation. And so what might that look like in very clear and specific terms? It looks like smart people, where through education, through training, and an open approach to how we resource talent, we can unleash creativity and future-proof our workforce. It is about smart government, smart governance, where we are a citizen-centered government that delivers reliable, affordable digital access to all services, making ease of doing business a reality. It is about a smart economy. It is about a smart society, where digitally intelligent citizens who are connected and comfortable in a digital space participate actively. It is about smart infrastructure, where our communications, telecommunications, broadcasting, where our utilities, energy, water, where our roads, management, traffic management, stoplight management, where our ports, our airports and seaports, where they all leverage technology to monitor, to measure, to protect, to secure, and to inform decisions. And a smart security and a smart environment, all of which are being defined. And I have to say to you that what I just broke out there to you in terms of smart people, smart governance, smart economy, smart society, smart infrastructure, smart security, and smart environment, that work has been done by some of the members, by the members of the Telecommunications Working Group, who not only looked at some of the reforms that might be required in telecommunications, but they also looked at what a smart Barbados could look like. And as we say, that experience is evolving. And I want to, at this point, recognize Dr. Babb, Dr. Annalie Babb, who has chaired that telecommunications working group, and a number of the other members. And I think I saw one or two of the members in here. Are there any members of that working group that are still in here now? Yes, I see Glenda, who is the lawyer on that group. And please stand, Glenda. The former president of the chamber as well. As well as we have specialists in telecommunications, specialists in law, specialists in technology, specialists in cybersecurity, and a whole range of skill sets on that working group. And one of the things people said to me as we were seeking to set up the cybersecurity working group, and I can say this as an aside, is what's the terms of reference? And I say to them, the way this government works is not about what's your terms of reference, it's what is your delivery agenda. And that means that it is not just about what we're going to talk about. It has to be about what is going to be the outcome at the end of these working groups. The intention is that these working groups will not last forever. They will come together, they will deliver, they will disband. And when we need another working group, we will then reassemble another working group, perhaps with some of the same people, but also with different people, because we believe that it is not the same voices and the same skills and the same minds that need to come to the table to have this conversation, but we need to spread that wide and make sure that all of Barbados has the opportunity to participate. And one of the things I'm going to share when we talk about all of Barbados, how many of you in here are members of BART? Come on, proudly. The Barbados Association of Retired Professionals. Again, one of the things this government has sought to do with regards to our collaborations is to engage non-traditional partners. And the Barbados Association of Retired Professionals have about 30,000 paid up members plus more. Therefore, if we are going to make this transition as a country together, we need to make sure that partners like BART are also on board with us, not only in terms of taking the message, but in terms of putting programs out there for its clients, its constituents, to ensure that you know that where Barbados is headed, it is for you too, and that we will leave no one behind. Now, all of this is to say that a smart Barbados is a Barbados in which technology is enabling rapid changes and driving innovation, in which the public sector will have to deliver services efficiently and in new and interesting ways, and in which Barbadian citizens and businesses must embrace global trade. And I'm going to pause and say a little bit about global trade, because cross-border digital trade is intensely occupying the attention of multilateral bodies, such as the World Trade Organization, and it is doing so for good reason. There are shifts that are taking place in the global economy, led in some cases by the adoption of digital technologies in business across all sectors. You heard Ms. Boyer say earlier that there are significant shifts that are happening. I will say to you that some of the research has shown that software will disrupt 90% of traditional industries in the next 5 to 10 years. 90%. And that's just software. We are not yet getting into all of the other technologies that are there. And you will notice that Uber is just software. They don't own any cars. Airbnb is the biggest, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, hotel company in the world. They don't own any properties. What this says to us, that it is no longer about what you own. It is no longer about what you have physical control of in your hands that will determine what services and what products we will produce. It is very much understanding what the expectations of the customer is and being able to make the adjustment to deliver to them in very many different ways. Now, some of you in this room are already feeling the effects of customer expectations of what you deliver and how you deliver goods and services. It is changing. Some of the global brands to which we have grown to love, have started to disappear. Kodak, Blockbuster, and I believe on our landscape, we can name a few others too that have started to disappear and are having financial difficulty at this time. There are also global brands that we can seek to emulate or surpass, or use the technology, leverage their technology, or create our own technology that allows us to do the things, if not the way they did it, certainly to get the outcomes that they have gotten. But you'll notice that all of them are almost entirely digital. Whether you're talking about Amazon and how it distributes, whether you're talking about Netflix, whether you're talking about Google, you would recognize that those companies that are now rising at a tremendous pace in this world are almost all digital or have significantly embraced the digital age. Now, here at home, the growth and development of the local ICT sector is critical to our vision of a digital Barbados. And to this end, I am pleased to announce that the government, with the support of the International Telecommunications Union, will begin a wider consultative process to formulate a new national ICT strategy to take us forward into the next 5 years. The proposed framework for the new national ICT strategy is organized around 5 pillars: digital rights, digital connectivity, digital government, digital economy, and digital skills and inclusion. I thought that it was important for me to share this with you at this time, because over the next few months, there will be consultants working along with government and with our private sector who will be helping us to think through and flesh this out so that the vision and the strategy becomes something that is owned by us all. Now, the process will include the mapping of our existing situation, including the legal and regulatory frameworks, as well as metrics that will provide us with a useful baseline from which we will start and therefore measure success. The process will also allow us to more clearly define the desired future state, and we will also be conducting a gap analysis to identify key actions required to bring this country from our current state to our desired future state. The specific actions required to fill existing gaps will be consolidated pillar by pillar and will form the basis of a national digital strategy. All of this is for me to say to you that as we move forward, we will do so strategically, we will do so focused, and we will do so with all of you on board. My ministry is very mindful of the fact that there have been national strategies done before, and it is not our intention to do the same thing in the same way and expect a different result. The stakes are too high right now for bureaucratic posturing, and we recognize, though, that the framework for a national strategy is important in helping us to be able to measure success. The model of collaboration that we believe will help to create and implement solutions to challenges that are faced in government and by government is an approach that has yielded success in programs such as the BIMTECH that you would have heard of in Scotland. It's also mentioned in our manifesto. And so we have simultaneously, along with this work we are doing to build a national ICT strategy, brought on board one of the leading architects of this accelerator program called BIMTECH. And in the next month or so, BIMTECH will bring together public sector and private sector creativity to solve real problems in government and for government, to develop products and deliver services that are better and faster than anything government can do on its own. Now, while we are working on this strategy as well, MIST has outlined a work program for 2019-2020, where we have placed priority on several areas. And we want to share with you what those priority areas are. We share this because we want you to understand that government understands that we cannot do all at the same time. And not every priority can be the first priority. And so over the next 18 months, 24 months, there are certain areas on which we will place priority. And we want to share that with you because we want to invite you to collaborate with us in any of those areas. And we have come to a place of defining these priorities based on what our business community has said to us, based on what our citizens have said to us. And so those areas are and I'm checking to make sure that I do not miss any, the Immigration Department. Particularly, I know for some business people, work permits, as well as for passports and other aspects and visas. Customs Department. We know that tremendous work was done before this government came into being, and that work, which would have made us first in the region using certain types of technology for customs purposes, was implemented in a manner that has now left us as almost the last in the world to still be using that old technology. And we will be moving towards a secure world, which is a technology-enabled solution for customs that will ensure that some of the discretion that once existed in customs will be lessened, and that human intervention in processes that ought, in fact, to have great integrity can continue to be so. And so there's going to be some work with regards to customs, and of course this is always in collaboration with other ministries and departments and agencies. Another area will be the police department, registration department, particularly as it relates to births and deaths and the court system, town and country planning, particularly as it relates to the applications for town and country planning permissions, the Barbados Licensing Authority, as it relates to your driver's licenses and other licenses. I see some happy faces around the room. And of course, international business, in terms of your business registration. And while we are here, I want to thank BIBA, the Barbados International Business Association, who yesterday met with our team for a focus group on some of the changes and some of the early wins we might be able to have in the international business sector. As we said, the conversation continues, the collaboration continues, and as we seek to deconstruct and reconstruct the processes in that area that will help to make doing business easier, we started that process with a conversation with the people who are most affected by it. And that will always be the approach we take. So I want to thank the members of BIBA for the support that they gave us yesterday in that focus group and helping us to point us in the right direction as to where that system needs to go. Other areas of focus is the legislative agenda. We will be looking towards legislation that supports new modes of business in a digital environment. There is the information technology consolidation of all of government. As you know, different pieces of government have different pieces of the infrastructure, and we really need to be able to consolidate that infrastructure so that we can not only manage it better, but we can protect it better as well. Cybersecurity, we mentioned that a bit earlier, not only government, but also a national response. Building smart city and the support and infrastructure for a smart city. Some of you will have seen the RFPs. We have set out the RFPs for smart city. I believe the return should be sometime in April or later this month. And so we will continue to move the procurement process through the proper channels to ensure that everyone who has expressed an interest are able to put their proposal on the table and to be a part of building the best Barbados together. Now, some of the programs that I mentioned earlier, such as the public sector modernization and digitization, they are part of an IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, $40 million program. We are currently in the process of completing the paperwork to access those funds so that we can begin the implementation apace. In some cases, as I mentioned, we have already put the RFP out there, and we have also started to work on certain services, such as the police certificate of character, your liquor license, your entertainment licenses, and a number of other services which government will be putting online over the next several months. Now, within the short term, the government will also move towards the elimination of checks. As I would have mentioned, there is some work being done by the Ministry of Finance in collaboration with the banks and the credit unions and BRA and the Treasury and the National Insurance Scheme to be able to bring that single digital payment system to you. In addition, MIST is working on a solution to replace all paper forms, all the forms within government that is produced by the government printery. We're seeking to move that to an online, move to online forms, even for agencies that may not yet have fully digitized and integrated their back office processes. This will, in the first instance, cut back on high expenditure that's associated with the production and distribution of paper forms, and simultaneously, it will start to prepare agencies for the digital transition that lies ahead. There is much more to discuss this morning, and I have not delved into the issues around the much needed legislative reform. I have mentioned it, but I have not delved into those issues as it relates to e-legislation. But this is by no means to underplay its importance. The draft data protection bill is moving through the system as we speak. It is currently at the CPC being drafted. It is our hope that, if not before, very close to Easter, we will have our data protection bill moving through the legislature. And this is on a fast track in light of the global imperatives, not only the EU, but because of government's desire to make sure that we have the proper type of legislation in place to protect our people and their data and their privacy. Now, the reform of the Telecommunications Act to enable local number portability, the establishment of Universal Service Fund, and the principles of net neutrality, among others, are also of critical importance, and it is what we are now pursuing in the interest. Now, in closing, the Prime Minister, in the delivery of her budgetary proposals and financial statement 2019, subtitled Stay the Course, stated that the digital transformation of government will be an engaging process led by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Smart Technology, and will involve constant engagement and public education of all systems. Citizens, the transformation of government is fundamental to the transformation of the economy. The engagement with the public, and I might also add, the business community more specifically, in this case, is central to our success as a ministry. And so I would like once more to thank the BCC for your invitation to share in this event. The work that is ahead of us is going to take some hard conversations. It's going to take some brave work, and it's going to take our whole hearts. And I simply want to appeal to you to hang in there and stay the course. And I trust that the vision which I articulated earlier, which is that of a modern Barbados that is globally connected and competitive in a digital space, where our people treat the world as our business and our business the world, will continue to be a part of the conversations that you have later on. They say if we make our vision so clear and compelling, then the challenges will become irrelevant. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Minister McConney for those remarks. I think it was very comprehensive and gave an excellent overview as to the direction that the government will take and the type of roadmap that it has articulated. So again, I think similar to the budget where people may have been a little concerned that we didn't know, now we know that there is a very clear direction that has been articulated and prepared. So it does sound like a very exciting time for the government of Barbados. I would also, at this stage, like to re-invite Minister McConney back to the stage along with Susan Boyer, where we would allow for a brief plenary discussion around some of the points that have been raised, as well as offering the audience the opportunity to ask relevant questions. All right. So, Susan, I will kick it off to you to ask the first question. But again, you know, I think we've been left a bit excited with the list of things that have been articulated. So I think there is a fantastic opportunity for both the government and the private sector to work together in transforming government and the way that we do business. So.
Well, again, thank you for being here. And I was diligently taking notes, trying to keep up. The first question that comes to mind is there's just such a long shopping list. And as members of the private sector and other organizations will obviously want to be able to understand if this is where the government is going and this is where I'm at, how do I bridge that gap? And I say that, or I put that out there, and tease how do we get our hands on what you've said about this strategy? Are you guys going to be publishing that out there with a clear timeline so that we can, with some kind of description around it, so that all of the organizations can get a better understanding as to what it means and how they can start to position themselves? That's the question that comes to mind. And I know, guys, that quite a lot said here today. We've asked for the presentation. We're going to be doing our part in terms of trying to determine next steps in terms of what is required to bring the private sector. Where are the gaps? How do we move? What's next? Those questions we are going to take as a committee. But I know for your own selves, you're probably asking that. What do I do next? Where do I start? How do I align myself closer to government? And what does that mean for me? So the question is really around the information being out there and how can we get access to it? And if there are questions that come up, what is the avenue to get those?
Thanks very much, Susan. Very good question. So, much of this information is going to be published, and so you will be able to get access to it. As I said, right now we have the working group who's working on building out the first stages of the Smart Barbados. I mentioned a number of them: the smart people, the smart environment, the smart infrastructure, etc. I met with them, in fact, yesterday morning as well, with regards to how far we are in terms of packaging that material in a way that is not just accessible, but it is easy for you to use and to work with, and to be able to see your place in each of them. And we decided we were going to take a different approach. We, in fact, had one big package that we were putting together, and we decided to break it up in each discrete piece, because members of the private sector may very well have a specific interest in one particular area, and you may not want to take the whole thing. You may simply want to go where it's most relevant to you. So first of all, yes, it will be made public. Yes, there's a working group that is working on how we are going to package that information and put it out there so it's accessible and palatable and relevant and useful to you. In terms of what else do you need to do now, I deliberately named some of those working groups. Those working groups have no shortage of need for people for some of the deliverables. Remember, we are working now on what are the specific deliverables. And I believe you and I would have had some conversations. We would have had some conversations with BIBA and with some others as well, where we say, look, here is the area of the working group. What are the skill sets that you can bring? We even had some conversations with the deputy head of the Bar Association yesterday as well, about what particular areas of law we might be able to use. So in your particular area, where we have identified those working groups, see which skill sets you have that you want to bring to that table, as well as what interests you may have that you would wish addressed within that particular group, if indeed you're not coming as a participant. So yes, information available. There are very specific initiatives we have started to which people can attach themselves. The conversation also continues. This is not about government dictating, but there may be certain areas you believe we need to look at that we have not yet looked at, that you said, here is how we can take the initiative in that area with your support. It does not always have to be the government taking the first step. It's very much the private sector. We in fact believe that we need to continue to create the enabling environment, and the private sector really and truly needs to take the lead. And we are happy at this stage to collaborate in whatever way. So if there are areas where we are not yet looking and you think that there needs to be, then we ask that you take the initiative in those areas and then speak to us. And we will be very happy to collaborate.
Good. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Questions from the floor? There's a question. I think Carlos.
Hi, good. Thank you very much, Minister Hallam Hope, here in the different hats. Last evening at the Ramphal lecture, the issue was raised about GDPR. In the context of the legal foundation for the imposition of fines on companies, which I'm told, may be corrected, could be up to as much as $10 million. So the question is really, will the ministry, or have you given any thoughts to whether in fact GDPR, which is really a European Union legislated and directed matter, has really any foundation on developing countries like Barbados, which are trying and struggling to address our economic challenges at a time when the GDPR could possibly impose tremendous costs and may in fact not be actually legislatively grounded in terms of imposing any fines and costs to companies here in Barbados.
Well, first of all, it's a regulation rather than a law or a statute. GDPR is really a set of regulations that have been shared, as you would have heard your colleague mention, where we're asking the world to meet certain standards in terms of how we collect, how we store, how we process, and how we share information, data in particular, and particularly as it relates to citizens of the European Union. You ask whether or not they have any jurisdiction. You know, that has been a debate that is going on around the world as to what jurisdiction do they really have. But we are living in a world now where it is about who has the greatest influence. And so legal jurisdiction, even if we consider the OECD, Barbados is a part of the OECD process, and you would have recalled that we had to dismantle a 30-year-old international business sector so that we could become compliant with the OECD. Someone might say, well, is there legal jurisdiction? Well, if we participate in that process and we wish to be a part of the global family that's respected, we will have to make some decisions about how we wish to play in this new world. GDPR by the EU is also one of those sets of regulations where we have to determine what is the cost to us if we do not participate. So sometimes the question we have asked ourselves is not, do you have jurisdiction, but what will it cost us if we do not play with the rest of the world according to the rules that so many others have sought to accept?
Yeah, I just want to add to that our work with the Digital Society Committee, it is obvious that there's limited awareness with respect to GDPR. And that's why we have it on the agenda for this morning, just as a kickstart, to start that discussion, and you'll be hearing more from us about that.
And I also want to add that once we move through the point of awareness, which has to be a part that we do together, our ministry in collaboration with the private sector, we also then have to say what kind of support that you're going to need. So I'm hoping that coming out of your discussions today is not just here's what we know, but also being able to say here's what we need, and being able to come up with ways in which you can collaborate, work with each other, as well as work with government to make sure that the kind of support that you need to make whatever transitions are necessary at this stage, that we do it in a way that, again, is very focused, very targeted, and very strategic to your interests.
Good morning, Minister McCarney. Thank you for that excellent, comprehensive indication of the processes and systems that you are that the government is going to be using. My name is Norma Shorey, and I'm the president of the Barbados chapter of the Management Consulting Association. So you have identified the importance of the technical areas in terms of providing the information and helping people to develop the information and knowledge about the importance of the digital economy. My question is in terms of getting people's buy-in. What are the change management processes that you are planning to introduce? Because technical people are great, but sometimes there's a miss between the technical expertise and the people acceptance. You can get the knowledge and the awareness of the need for change, but unless there's a desire to make the change at the company level, at the individual level, at the senior level, and I'm a very proud member of BARP, may I add, but also at even the younger people. Sometimes it's going to be difficult to get people to make that shift. So my question is, what is being put in place as you move forward to address the change management challenges, which will undermine, derail the process if you're not addressing them directly?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked that question, Norma. You hit it on the head. This is really a change management process. And we have to make sure that people are aware of the change, that they have the desire to change, that they know how to change, that they have the ability to change, the skills, etc., and that we then reinforce the change that is necessary. That is the process that there is, and each one of us in our change efforts, we can then inject, we can simply overlay this on whatever we are doing as a change process. Are my people aware? Do they have the desire? Do they know how to change? Do they have the ability to change? And how am I going to reinforce change? So that becomes the approach. And I am glad that you asked, because we are getting ready to bring on board some change management specialists as we speak. And we understand that some of those resources will exist within government, and some of those resources will exist outside of government. And therefore, we are bringing that kind of support into government, but with the intention that we will also train change agents within government, so that there will be a transition where we can finally start to manage our own change within government. And so I hope that that answers your question. At this point in time, I'm going to have to excuse myself. I am supposed to be in the Senate right now in debates. And so I am going to take one more question, and then I will pass back to Susan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Khalil Bryan. Minister McCarney, thank you very much for the great presentation and kind of giving us a great overview of where we're going. So I'm going to give a preamble about our company, and then I'm going to ask the specific question to you about measurement and engagement with the Barbadian population. So our company is Caribbean Transit Solutions, and we produce an app called Beat Bus. It allows us to give real-time information on buses. It's live. You can go download it. That's a plug. Go download it. But one of the things is that we also work with private companies to help them measure and manage their fleets more effectively. So they're able to take that data and use that data to, in many cases, reduce cost, or in some cases, or in many other cases, make the business more efficient. Now, a number of years ago, we met with a company in DC that allows their governments to collaborate better with their people, and their people to collaborate better with their government. For example, if there is a pothole, they can report that pothole directly on a platform. The people responsible for that will be able to see that and then be able to engage with it, and the problem gets solved. Even more specifically, as you mentioned a number of the initiatives that you're going to be rolling out, is there any way for the Barbadian population to say, these are the things that are happening, this is the stage where it is, and I can now give feedback from my perspective of, oh, I see that that's been effective, I can see that that has not been so effective. So that there's, in some sense, a real-time collaboration with the Barbadian population and with the government. Has there been anything thought about like that, and are you moving forward with the platform similar?
Two things. Looking at it from two different perspectives. First of all, it's engaging the population, the citizens, and the private sector in solving problems for government and with government and in government. And that is the CivTech initiative, which I mentioned earlier. As I said, that architect, one of the architects of that program that has been so successful in Scotland, will be joining us shortly within the next 30 to 60 days, and will in fact be moving that accelerator program to accelerate those types of solutions within government and to bring that innovation to the public sector. That's number one. Number two, in terms of tracking what is going, as you mentioned, that people can go in and see what is happening, there is a dashboard that is also part of the modernization and digitization program that will enable that variability that you mentioned, that will in fact be able to let us track projects and for you to go in and to see what is going on and perhaps have the opportunity to make some input. Now I trust that that answers your question. So we're doing that, we're addressing this from the front end and we're addressing it from the back end as well. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you all for your time, and I'm just going to run. I'm going to ask Mr. Rodney Taylor, who is in charge of digital services for the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, to join you and perhaps answer some of the questions that you have for me.
Questions? No? Let's just see her out. Any more questions from the floor?
It doesn't appear so, Susan, but since I have the mic, I have a question. The minister explained quite a bit and set a very clear vision for that her ministry is currently leading. The question I have is, how are we balancing that, Rodney, with the level of communication that is going to be necessary for Barbadians and the business community in terms of understanding the vision that has been set and some of the transformation that is going to be initiated by the ministry?
Thank you for the question. I'm Rodney Taylor. As the Minister mentioned, I am actually right now the Director of the Data Processing Department. The Ministry has proposed a new structure which is going through the process of being accepted and receiving the blessing of the Ministry of the Public Service and the Prime Minister. Part of the new functions include a communications function, because we understand the need to communicate these programs effectively to the public. The other departments, which including a cybersecurity department, public sector efficiency department, and others. But I wanted to underscore the fact that we've understood the need for communicating these programs, as the minister would have mentioned, and so there is a communications function that would allow us to get information out to the public using the traditional as well as the non-traditional means of communication, social media, etc. And engaging with members of the chamber to get the information out to the public. That's basically in a nutshell what the plan is.
Hold on to that. Is there another question from the floor?
Yes, hello. My name's David Knight. I'm fascinated to hear everything that's sort of planned for the economy. It's really exciting actually to hear this all in one room today. You've touched on, and my personal interest is education. I come from a history. I'm a retired BART member, although I lived most of my life in the UK, but I spent a lot of my time here on the island. I'm fascinated to understand, as I've got more into digital in the last 4 or 5 years, working with people all over the world actually, how you're going to shift the culture. And my colleague here, a learned lady from the MCA, touched on it a moment ago about change management. Digital is not a sort of one-off transformation exercise. You know, digital is here to stay. Digital is our lives, all our lives, our children's lives, and the children to come's lives in the country. So for me, it's about wrapping a shift to digital from school through university, keeping people educated. If I ask the people in the room here today, how many of you guys understand all the components of it, all the technologies and what's possible from digital? Most of us probably don't understand that. And it's a huge education challenge. And I come from a world of the private sector, and I work with large organizations, and they're all wildly off hitting on new technologies, experimenting, innovating, and introducing technology all over the place in some big organizations, which has sort of got out of control, actually. But many are still fundamentally missing the issue around education. They're not skilling the people. You talk about bringing people from working groups to join your group to do stuff. Well, you sort of need digital skills to do that. Yeah. So my question is really about how you're going
applications. In the first instance, we focus on the TAMIS, the online tax system, management and information system, real hand-holding in terms of getting people on board, particularly senior citizens and so on, those that need to make that transition. So we're working with the University of the West Indies. There's some other initiatives that would help to transition in terms of the mindset, because we realize that the technology just one component. So we expect fully that for each working group, part of it will be that transition. The ministry itself, in terms of the transformation that needs to happen within the public service, which is a very big sector, includes what is at the moment, and will be shortly transition, it includes the Office of Public Sector Reform. So in terms of changing the mindset within government as well, because we can implement electronic systems, online services, and payments, but we also recognize that there are processes, there are structures, there are mindsets within the public service that also have to be transformed. And so that is the very reason why the Office of Public Sector Reform was also included.
In addition to that, concerns that we have, particularly as it pertains to the cashless society, there are implications in terms of banking that we already face now when we're doing transactions and the cost of doing business, and we've seen the cost steadily rise. So now that we're talking about a cashless society, I'm not sure if or what strategies we're going to try to employ to kind of help defer some of those costs that banks will have to use to be able to provide some of that services. And then secondly, we're also talking connectivity. The cost of connectivity is ginormous. It's ridiculous in some places. The infrastructure alone to maintain security and so on is expensive. So a connected smart Barbados also has a lot of cost implication. So what would be some of the plans or strategies to kind of alleviate or spread or just manage that cost for businesses and then for individuals?
Thanks for the question. We have some of our providers here who are members of the chamber who might also want to jump in there in terms of the cost of connectivity. With respect to online banking and the cost, we're working with the Banking Association, we're working with the credit unions, and with providers of other payment platforms. The truth is, if we implement a cashless society, it's supposed to reduce the cost of doing business, not increase. Because banks do not recognize that it is costly to have customers standing in line. It is costly to produce checks and to reconcile those checks. So banks have been pushing their own customers to use the online banking platforms. Most banks in Barbados today have launched an online banking platform and are directly pushing their customers towards that. What are fees the banks determine to charge for those online services? I'm not sure that the government has full control over that, but I think the market should determine where customers gravitate to based on those things like bank fees and charges and so on. For the government itself, it's a huge cost. The government prints, places like the NIS, they print in excess of 70,000 checks every month. The cost of managing that, the inefficiencies that allows for, that encourages, we fully expect that the cashless system, the ability for them to debit accounts directly or provide cards where the beneficiaries can access cash by ATM or use it at the point of sale. We fully expect that to reduce the cost, not increase. In terms of cost and connectivity, it is something that the telecom working groups are looking at. The telecom working group, we believe that, again, a competitive market should help to drive that. The providers are here. I believe that they can speak to the cost. But we recognize, yes, that it is important that those costs are affordable, and we believe that rather than dictate those costs, that the market a competitive market should help to drive those prices down.
So I'll just chip in here on the cost of connectivity. The truth is the cost of connectivity has gone down significantly in the last 5 years. No question. One of the things that we are fortunate to have in Barbados is one of the best networks in the region, and that's a fact. We have full fiber to the home across the entire island. That's unheard of in the Caribbean. We have a full LTE network, again, unheard of in the Caribbean. So in Barbados, we're in a really good position to provide a platform to be able to do some of the things that we want to do to move Barbados forward in a cost-effective manner. Thank you.
Just going back to the lady over here, I guess your question, as I understood it, and I think Rodney specifically addressed it, but I think what I'm hearing is a general concern around the government of Barbados is moving in this direction. We are here. There's obviously a cost associated with private and organizations moving from here to future state. And I would say, as I mentioned earlier, that is one of the reasons why the Digital Society Committee was formed. We're going to be reaching out to organizations. It is our intention to attempt to assess that gap and to be working very closely with organizations to help bridge that gap, to understand your concerns and address those concerns. So I'm glad that you raised that, and I'm happy that I could have responded in that way. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Kolade, and he will advise you as to what happens from here. Aside.
All right, so again, I would like to thank our panelists for the comments that they've made and the responses. We are going to move very quickly into a very short break of 10 minutes. We would have lost some time, so we've shortened it slightly. So I invite you to share in some available refreshments and so on. And we'll start promptly in 10 minutes' time, where we will have the discussion with regards to GDPR. Thank you. where are they? Let us apologize for the delay. As you can see, we have some colleagues who are calling in from Brussels. So again, in the vein of the PM's previous initiative, we gathering. We're bringing people from far and away and utilizing the enabling technologies to do so. But very quickly, the first thing we want to do is to give a token of appreciation to the first person who was here and on time today, and that person is Terry Burke from the Central Bank. So thank you very much, Terry, for being here and being on time. Right, okay. So at this point in the program, we are moving on to the discussion around GDPR, which Susan would have mentioned earlier in her presentation. Now, we are very aware that GDPR for a lot of businesses remains, again, this very nebulous topic. We really don't know what it means, how does it apply. We know that there is a massive fine if we are not able to keep European Union data private, and who is paying for the costs associating to upskilling both your teams as well as building capacity in terms of security and privacy to be able to be in compliance. So we thought it would have been useful to invite the EU to provide some comments on GDPR so that we can support our members in having a better understanding of what GDPR is and what it will mean for them. So on the call, we do have Mr. Ralph Schurer, Deputy Head of Unit within DigiJust of the European Commission. And we also want to thank the members of the European Union who've helped to support this initiative as well. So Ralph, we're handing over to you and you're live. We can see you on screen.
Okay, so first of all, welcome. Let me know, maybe first of all, whether you can hear me properly. Does it work?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Very good, very good. So then welcome from my side, or thank you for having me, rather. So I don't know what, in terms of my person, just very briefly, in the European Commission, which deals with the policy making on behalf of the European Union, within the European Commission we have something like a ministry, which we call Directorate General for Justice, and within that body we have a data protection unit that deals with international data flows and data protection. And I'm the deputy of that unit department, if you wish. So we deal with the external dimension, let's say, of privacy, of data protection. You know, and that's the reason why you have asked for a presentation and for having this dialogue, that we in the European Union have recently reformed our data protection rules. It's not the first time that the European Union has such rules. We have them actually since the mid-90s. But as you can imagine, in the meantime, a lot of things have changed. The technology has changed. Of course, we have very different types of data processing and therefore very different types of risks and challenges that needed to be reflected in a revised set of rules. We also have a much more global dimension, let's say. Data in the past used to stay in one place, also because it was basically paper-based data. Now, of course, with electronic data, it travels across borders. Borders are becoming increasingly irrelevant in a way for data processing. So those were two of the main reasons to look at our rules and update them for the modern digital economy. But another reason was, that's maybe also important to know, that the law that we had previously, which was called a directive, was a different type of instrument. A directive in EU law is something like a framework law. So it leaves a leeway, it leaves discretion to some extent to our member states in the European Union to implement that law into their national rules. And that meant that the rules were not very much aligned. There was quite a bit of differences and therefore fragmentation in the rules. And that's, of course, not good for business because, I mean, what we want to achieve is a high level of protection for individuals, but we want to also make sure that business can operate smoothly in an internal market, and therefore one of the objectives of the reform was also to harmonize the rules, and that we have achieved. We have now what is called the General Data Protection Regulation, a different type of instrument. A regulation is a law which directly applies in the European Union without the need for further implementation. And that's something which is good for business, as I said, and not just for business in Europe, but of course also, and we will get to that, business operators that operate from outside but offer their goods and services in the European Union. In terms of the, let's say, the main ideas, concepts that were pursued with the reform, one important aspect was, of course, to give individuals a bit more control over the data, because what we saw when we started the process of reform, and that's something which is not confined to Europe, is the surveys that were done, where people were asked about their concerns. It always turned back to the same point of lack of control or loss of control of individuals with respect to their data, and not knowing anymore what happens to their data, who is using it, for which purposes, with whom is it shared. So that's one of the main concerns, not just in Europe, as I said, but I think in many countries around the world. And so the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, seeks to strengthen a bit the control of individuals by strengthening the transparency rules, for example, for data processing, strengthening a bit the rules on consent. Although consent is only one of the basis, the grounds on which data processing can be carried out, but it's one of them, an important one. And so the requirements for consent have been a bit strengthened. And also by enlarging to some extent, but not too much, the rights that are provided to individuals. So that's one thing. And then another element is in terms of the obligations on companies, there was also a need to address certain risks for the first time. For example, when it comes to data breaches, so we have a new requirement of data breach notification. So information to a data protection authority, and in some cases also to individuals. That's a new requirement, which is also there to better protect individuals. And then one last aspect, maybe the aspect of enforcement and compliance. The GDPR builds very much on the concept of accountability. So the idea that it's the business operator in the first place that is responsible for ensuring compliance with the rules, for demonstrating compliance. So we go away from what we had in the past, where we had very often pre-authorization or pre-notification of data processing to assist, so an ex-ante control by authorities. That is by and large scrapped, so which is also good for business. But on the other hand, of course, it means that business has the full responsibility to ensure compliance, and this is backed up by enforcement. And enforcement in Europe means through independent data protection authorities. And so we have strengthened the system of enforcement by ensuring better cooperation of data protection authorities, by also ensuring that they decide in a uniform way. So also to ensure that the rules are not just the same in Europe, but they also applied and interpreted in the same way. And then, of course, these authorities have different types of powers. I heard at the beginning in the introduction there was a reference to fines. Fines is the ultima ratio. It's one of the possible tools that can be used, and and as we always say, the best fine is one which is not applied. So which had the deterrent effect on companies to ensure compliance. Data protection authorities have many other tools which go from warnings, recommendations, to ordering a company to do a certain thing or not doing something. And fines are only, let's say, the last resort. And it's maybe also important to point out that you might always hear this figure of 4% of turnover. I think this is a bit misleading. The 4% is the absolute maximum cap the highest fine possible for the most serious violation. We have not seen anything of this so far, and I doubt that we will see it for a long time, if ever. There's a whole catalog of factors that will be applied when assessing whether a fine should be imposed and how high such a fine should potentially be. So in terms of what type of data is affected, is it very sensitive data or not? Was the non-compliance, was it done intentionally, which will rarely happen, I think, or was it done negligently, which of course will lead to a lower fine? Has the company cooperated with the authorities, and so far, and further criteria like this? So enforcement is an important aspect, of course, of these new rules, but one shouldn't sort of focus only on one aspect of the enforcement regime, which is possible sanctions. So this is in a very broad stroke some of the elements of our reform. I think it's also important to note that there are a number of features built into the new rules which are business friendly. I have already mentioned some. The fact that we have a harmonized set of rules now, the fact that we have no longer pre-authorization or pre-notification requirements, but also, for example, that we apply a so-called risk-based approach. That means a number of the obligations under the GDPR do not apply to all business operators. It depends rather on the level of risk of the processing operation. So the type of data, whether it's particularly sensitive data, I don't know, like health data, for example, there might be more requirements. Also the volume of processing. So all of this together, the risk that is involved in the operations that are carried out. And so certain requirements, for example, data breach notification to individuals, or having a data protection officer, or carrying out a data protection impact assessment, which are instruments that are included in the GDPR, they don't apply across the board. They only apply to high-risk processing operations. So I think that's also perhaps important to know. In terms of the international dimension, so what I have described is something which, those are the rules that apply, of course, first of all, in Europe. But it's also correct that the rules can also apply under certain strict conditions to operators that are not in the European Union, but not in the sense that the rules would apply to anyone, for example, that processes the data of Europeans. That's a misperception. The rules actually only apply to operators outside the European Union, where they specifically target the EU market. And what does that mean? it means that there has to be a service offer or an offer of goods involving the processing of data to EU individuals in the European Union, and it has to be specific in the sense that it has to be obvious or clear from the way the service or product offer is made that the targets are Europeans and not just anybody. So, for example, the use of a particular language of the European Union, if the service offer is in French, that could be an indication that the French market is targeted. The use of, the possibility to pay in euro, so the use of a currency in the European Union or one of the remaining domestic currencies, that could be an indication. They have to be viewed together, and it has to be clear that it's not an offer that is in a way globally done, but it's really specifically targeted. And one has to distinguish from that a situation, for example, where you just have, for example, an internet site where maybe in English, because that's in a way the language that is very much used globally in trade, and you can be found on the internet. So individuals, when they search, they might find you. But then it's not like you are targeting the European Union, it's rather individuals can, in a way, approach you. And that would, for example, be a situation where the GDPR does not apply. So why is this distinction relevant? Because it's a jurisdictional issue, if you wish. The GDPR only applies to operators that specifically want to participate in the European market, of course remotely, by offering goods or services through electronic means, but they want to specifically compete for customers in the European Union, and they do so, of course, in competition also with other operators that are established in the European Union, and it's then only fair and only justified that, of course, they have to play by the same rules. And so the application of the GDPR is limited to those situations. What is certainly not covered, for example, is when a European comes, is traveling abroad, and then, I don't know, gives his or her name or credit card details to a tour operator or a hotel. That's not something which, that has nothing to do, there's no link to the European Union other than that a European is involved, but that's not sufficient. So in these situations, the GDPR plays no role. It's the domestic law of the third country that applies. So I wanted to make that very clear, because there's a lot of misunderstandings, I think, around the territorial scope of the new rules. And we have similar concepts in other areas, and other countries have also using these concepts. For example, in the area of competition law, antitrust, as it's called in the US, is very much built around the same idea of if you have a specific link to the territory of a country, then you might be covered by the competition rules of that country. So those are just it's a short overview. Maybe the last point, the European Union is by no means alone in this. I think that's also something that should be said. We see the same developments around the world, which is easy to understand. I think we all face the same challenges, the same risks, and there are only so many ways to address them. That's why we see a lot of convergence around the world in individual countries. We have now something like 120, 125 countries around the world that have data protection laws. We also see a number of regional approaches. In your neighborhood, for example, Latin America and Central America have developed the so-called Ibero-American data protection standards, very similar to the GDPR, and other regions are doing the same. So I think that's also important to bear in mind because it also means it's actually a good thing because I think business operators that operate globally, they actually prefer to have similar rules in the countries in which they operate. And that's why we're very much working with international partners to further increase the convergence between our systems. And this is happening, as I said. So I understand your particular interest in our rules, but it's just one of the many data protection systems that are out there, and they are increasingly similar. So I would leave it with that because I think it's maybe better if you tell me a bit what your questions are, what your interest is, or your reactions, and then we take it from there. Thank you.
Okay, Ralph, thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So I'm now going to open the questions to the floor, but I'm going to kick it off with a very quick question to you. Well, two very quick questions. So one, what resources is the EU making available to non-EU companies in terms of understanding what they need to put in place to be compliant? That is one question. And the second question relates to whether or not you could give some insights where you have seen organizations leverage GDPR as an opportunity to improve their competitiveness in selling into the EU space.
Okay. So shall I answer? So on the first question, it's events like today. Of course, we cannot go to every country or every region around the world. We do a lot of outreach and explanations through events like this. We have done this and often through video conference. We have done this on a number of occasions, often together with business associations in the respective countries. There is also a lot of guidance available on the internet, and I think it's actually quite helpful guidance from what is called the European Data Protection Board. The European Data Protection Board, and the website is www.edpb.eu. Sorry. The European Data Protection Board is the body that brings together all the data protection authorities in Europe, and they are it's the body responsible for interpreting the rules, and they have been very busy. As you might know, our rules came into effect already 2 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, and they entered into full application only 2 years later. And these 2 years were there for the data protection authorities to provide further guidance on many of the concepts that you can find in the GDPR. So on most of what I have said just in my introductory remarks, on what is a data protection officer and when do you need it, what is a data breach notification, how does it work, data protection impact assessment, the notion of consent. On all these aspects, you will find guidance papers from the European Data Protection Board, and you find them on its website. So that's, I mean, of course, I'm not saying that this is the only thing, but it is quite a helpful tool, I think, this website, to if you have a question, to get further clarity on some of these issues. But on our side, as European Commission, we mostly work through outreach events. We also happy that, I mean, we have also always worked with our delegation, and questions can be channeled through the delegations to us. So that's also a possibility. If you have particular questions, you can channel them through the delegation, and we will have a look at them and reply to the best of our capacities, obviously. So that's the kind of activities that we think are useful. The other question that you had, I think, was, if I understand you correctly, is the GDPR, I mean, is compliance with the GDPR, is that also something one can actually use to the benefit of a company? And I hope I understand it correctly. Huh?
Yes,
and
correct.
I would say yes. Indeed, because of what I said about the reaction from individuals that we see worldwide in one survey after the other, and of course fueled by incidents, data breaches like Cambridge, Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, the fact that individuals were losing trust in business operators, in particular, of course, communication operators, as regards the use of their data. I think following the GDPR, showing compliance with the GDPR is very important in terms of increasing trust and therefore strengthening the relationship with your customers. So that's certainly one aspect, and that we have also seen. I mean, many companies have told us that, or have made public statements to that effect, that it helps them, and it is a competitive advantage if they can show that to customers that your data is safe with me, and I will only treat it in a certain way that is predictable for individuals. And then, of course, there's also business opportunities, I would say. The GDPR, in a way, pays off for companies that are innovative when it comes to privacy protections. So we have something which is called the concept or the principle of privacy by design. So the idea that you should build privacy into your organization, into your procedures, into the design of your products and services from the start, because that's the most cost-effective way of doing it. If you do it later, you might have to adapt your procedures and your products. If you think privacy from the start, it's actually the best way, because then it becomes almost automatic. And this has led to a whole new market for privacy-friendly technologies, software that helps companies, for example, to organize their data management, data security applications. There's a whole market for this, and I think there are certain regions of the world where certainly this is becoming an important business sector. I was recently in India, and certainly it's something that there's a whole part of the tech sector which is focusing on developing these kind of tools and software. So that's also maybe important, and I think for companies, there's the general reaction that we often get is that applying the GDPR actually helps them to also know a bit better how they actually manage data, which data they have, and they often find out that on the one hand, they might have data which they actually don't need, and that is a risk that's better not to have, because it just increases the risk of data breaches, for example, hacking. And at the same time, companies also, when they look more closely at their own operations, they also realize that they might have data which they're actually not using at all. It's in a way there, but it's not monetized. It's not made use of. So that's also something which where the GDPR, I think, can help, because it in a way forces you to think through your whole operation. What data do you collect? What do you do with it? With whom do you share it? For which purpose? And it improves the data management and therefore also the overall operation of the company. So there are a number of features, I think, that are helpful. But the most important one, I think, is the one at the beginning, the trust factor, which is increasingly important because customers turn away from companies that don't guarantee a certain protection, a level of protection of their data. And of course, once you have a data breach or an incident of that sort, it can have dramatic consequences for companies. You might have seen these reports about Facebook losing something like $50 billion in the months following the revelations about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. Cambridge Analytica actually went bankrupt over the whole scandal. So there are significant economic consequences in terms of damage claims, in terms of reputational loss, in terms of just losing customers that don't trust you any longer. So it is worth investing in privacy and security. And at the same time, I think one shouldn't overestimate the costs of this. As I said, if you think of it from the start, if you build it into your systems, it doesn't have to be a costly thing to do. And there is this evolving market for privacy technologies, which also brings the price down for these kinds of instruments, software that you can use to manage your data. So I think there are significant benefits, and I think the costs are very often overestimated.
Yes, okay. Thank you for that response. Are there any other questions from the floor? Yeah, there's another mic.
You're putting me on the spot. Okay, good morning, or maybe evening for you there. We've just had a very
hear you.
Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me?
It's a bit difficult, but I try.
Okay, so that's why. Okay. Mr. Jensen. Hello.
Yes?
Okay, good. So, you hearing me? Are you hearing me? Much better now?
More or less. Let's
Okay,
see.
let's try, and I'll try to use as few words as possible. So we had a very lengthy discussion this morning around digital strategy and so on and so forth, and there have been some concerns around the room around, obviously, the high cost of technology. So the question I have for you is, for organization, first of all, it may not be still very clear to some organizations in the room as to if they need to comply or not. What I got from you was, and I like to simplify things, so maybe I'm simplifying this too much, but what I got from you is that if you're not directly targeting EU citizens, then perhaps it doesn't apply. And that may be too simplistic. So I want to give you a scenario. So holding that aside, if I'm not directly targeting EU citizens, but I have EU citizens within my database because perhaps they may have resided in Barbados and have now moved to the EU, does that apply for me? And the reason why I'm trying to kind of get to an understanding as to if it applies or not, it's just because, there may be a cost of addressing this scenario or this compliance. There is a cost. And the smaller the organization, they need to grapple with what do they need to do to address this gap or potential gap. Don't know how much of that you heard, but I'm going to hand over.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I of course perfectly understand. I mean that this issue of the scope of application is very important. So let me try again, and I think in your example it seems like there is one element certainly where the GDPR applies, which is when the processing takes place in the European Union. But that's obvious. Of course, the GDPR applies for everything that happens in the European Union. Whether the data originates from outside and is brought into the European Union, that doesn't matter. I mean, the same way as, of course, any product you bring into the European Union and I'm sure it's the same in Barbados, it has to comply with local rules on, I don't know, environmental protection, on standard setting, security, and so forth. It's the same for data. When it's processed in Europe, then for certain the GDPR applies. But I was trying to explain at the beginning in my introductory remarks, when does it also apply sometimes where the processing takes place outside of the European Union. And there it's much more limited, and it's only when this processing relates, as I said, to the targeted offering of goods or services in the European Union, and specifically with respect to individuals. And for example, one has to distinguish that from a situation where a company in Barbados receives data from a company in Europe that was looking for, to outsource a certain processing operation. That happens, of course, often, maybe also in the other direction, but let's take that scenario. A German company or a French company sends the data to a company in Barbados to have it processed in a certain way. In that scenario, the company in Barbados does not fall under the GDPR because it has not targeted end customers in the European Union. There are other rules for so-called international transfers. So the data exporter in the EU has to ensure a certain level of protection when the data is sent abroad. But that's not the application of the GDPR. There are contractual tools that can be used for that. So in the relationship between the EU data exporter and the Barbados data importer, they can then contractually agree on certain minimum safeguards, if you wish. But that's not the application, the direct application of the GDPR. So the direct application is really only if the foreign operator, let's say in Barbados, directly approaches end customers, so individuals in the European Union with an offer of goods or services, and there are these indications that I tried to give you, which you have to assess in their globality to see whether it's this targeted offer rather than a general offer to the whole world, which also includes the European Union. In the last scenario, the GDPR again does not apply. And certainly, as I also said, it's not relevant whether it's the data of Europeans. If as I said, if a French tourist then comes to Barbados and leaves his or her data there, that does not trigger the application of the GDPR. So it's much more limited than it's sometimes described. But when the data comes back in a way to Europe, then of course it's protected under our rules. The same way as if you would go to Europe and you check into a hotel and you give your data, you are protected like anybody else. The rules in the European Union don't distinguish by nationality. They are it's a human rights data protection in the European Union. So the same rules, the same protections apply to everybody. So it's first of all a territorial application with a certain extension to capture those situations, as I said, where foreign operators in a way remotely participate in the European market. Because then, as I said, they should play by the same rules, and also because they're trying to then obtain data from individuals in Europe, and then they should protect them in the same way as would be the case if the data collection takes place in Europe. So that's, I understand it's not, I mean, maybe one has to first think about this a bit, but I think it's in the end not so complicated to see this distinction. But let me know if that's the case. I'm happy to try a bit harder if the distinctions are not clear. Sure.
Good afternoon. My question has less to do with data protection than dollar protection. It's threefold. When a fine has been levied on a company for breach of a law or a rule or a regulation, how is that fine collected? Where does it go? And who decides how the proceeds are spent?
I couldn't hear everything, so I understood that when a fine is imposed, where is it? Who collects it? Where is it collected? I think.
How is it collected?
Who keeps it? I guess. And
where does it go?
I couldn't understand.
And who spends it?
Whose? Acoustically not. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Ah, okay. How are they spent? That part I didn't understand. Okay. So, that's not regulated in the... I mean, what is regulated in the GDPR is that it's the data protection authorities that are the enforcers of the data protection rules. They're the only ones that can impose fines. But then what happens with the with the fine, that's not regulated. It's something which is in the competence of our member states. It's national procedural law. So there are basically, I think, two options. Most of the time, this money goes into the budget, the general budget, which I think is the same like for many other fines. No, we have fines in many areas. As I said, antitrust fines, environmental. If you I don't know, if you violate labor laws and so forth. Usually in our member states, this money goes into the general budget and is then, of course, used as general budget for the general administration of the country. I don't think that I'm not aware that there is a system that there are member states where the money goes into the budget of the data protection authority. Normally we have rules in Europe that don't allow actually to have fines dedicated to an authority. They have to normally go into the general budget. So I don't want to swear that there isn't a case of our member states where this is differently, where the money would actually be directly used to fund the expenses of the staff, the means of a data protection authority, so the one that has imposed it. I wouldn't fully exclude it, but I don't think so. I think in most cases, if not all, it goes into the general budget. I don't know what you're aiming at. I mean, I hope you're not suggesting that there is a fear that, I don't know, data protection authorities would be particularly enthusiastic about fining because it would sort of fill their coffers. I don't think that's not possible. I think there are rules exactly on under which conditions fines can impose. Substantive rules, I mentioned that we have a provision which sets out the factors that need to be applied, and there will be also fining guidelines which further set out how fines should be determined in a uniform way across the European Union. And of course we have very developed procedural rules, due process rules, so you cannot just impose a fine if you don't have the evidence for an infringement. You have to prove the infringement. There are rights of defense for companies. So we have the general due process rules, which are at a constitutional level in our member states, and we even have what's called the European Charter of Human Rights, which backs all this up at a European level. So, I mean, I'm just saying this to be very clear that there is not the possibility for a data protection authority to, I don't know, go off track and start fining massively. I think, if at all, one could be a bit worried that maybe in a country, in a member state where there's a big industry that may be not sufficient. I mean, there's not sufficient use made of fines, but also there, you have to understand that we, under the rules, now have a mechanism whereby any cross-border case, so any case which involves data processing in more than one member state, has to be discussed at the level of the European Data Protection Board. So there is a pan-European discussion, and ultimately, if there are disputes and differences in views, a European decision on this, which the data protection authorities together by majority will take, and that ensures that a uniform application also of the fining powers.
Okay, thank you. Next one.
Yes, thank you. My question, notwithstanding what you've said in relation to the applicability of the regulations outside of the EU, and following on from Koladi's question about opportunities, are there any plans in relation to provision of blacklists, for example, of countries or companies that are not compliant because there are no local laws in relation to data protection, or there are weak laws, or there are no institutional frameworks to address data protection? In the same way, for example, that there are blacklists in relation to tax compliance and tax havens and so on. Or does this kick in only in relation to when there is a breach, or a breach is discovered, which could be years after, for example? So is the EU going to take a, let's call it a proactive approach in the terms of producing a list of non-compliant jurisdictions, or is this, like I said, only in the event that there is a breach or a breach is discovered? Thank you.
Again, I have to answer on the basis of, again, acoustically, I did maybe not grasp everything, but so I try my best. I think generally the theme was, is there the possibility, and maybe also the intention to have blacklists, so where certain jurisdictions, I understand, would be singled out in a way as not ensuring a certain level of protection. Maybe to put that in context, our rules, so we have, on the one hand, the rules that are described on the direct application of the GDPR, which again is more the exception in a way when it comes to foreign operators. If a foreign operator is covered by the GDPR, there's a requirement to have a representative. Normally, there's limited exceptions, but normally there's a requirement to have a representative in the European Union, which can be the addressee for enforcement action. So that's a way to ensure that everybody plays by the rules, as I said. When it comes to transferring data to operators abroad, we have also rules on that. As I said, the general idea of the GDPR is, and again, you find this in many countries around the world, that the protection of the data cannot stop at the border, because data very easily now crosses borders. So we have a certain requirement in the GDPR that when data travels abroad, there has to be some level of protection that travels with it. Not the same level, but certain minimum safeguards. And this can be ensured, for example, through contractual tools. And these contractual tools usually require that the data importer has to accept and also potentially being brought to court in Europe by the individual. So that's also a way to ensure that the rules are actually complied with, and of course also the data exporter can invoke the contract it has with the data importer to make sure that things are done properly. And then we have one tool which you might have heard of, but that's more a white list, if you wish, which is a so-called adequacy finding. So the European Commission has the power to determine that a jurisdiction, a third country, has a level of data protection which is adequate, and our courts have translated this as essentially equivalent to the level of protection that you have in the European Union. So, which means a very comparable level of protection. When we do that, when we make this finding, data can travel without any need for example, contractual instruments. So it's the free flow of data between Europe and the third country in the same way as data can flow between two of our member states. That you could, I mean, this has something like, it's a bit like a white list in a way, such an adequacy finding, and we have such adequacy findings for a number of countries. For example, in South America, Argentina or Uruguay, we have it for Canada, we have it in a very specific way though for the United States, and very recently we adopted an adequacy decision with respect to Japan, actually a mutual adequacy finding, so Japan did the same with respect to the European Union. So that's a possibility. There is also a possibility in the GDPR to have to exclude data transfers to a specific jurisdiction. So that would be possible. There could be a blacklist. We have not made use of this power yet. Also, because there are these contractual tools which go a long way of ensuring that even if the country itself does not have a data protection regime or not one which is really very strong, there is still the possibility on a contractual basis between the data exporter in the EU and the data importer in the third country to ensure a level of protection by the specific company. So you don't necessarily need this kind of background law in the third country, and that's why we have so far at least not seen any need to make use of this blacklisting tool.
Yeah, so Ralph, not to give you a little trouble, but is that a yes or a no?
Sorry,
I'm saying I'm giving you a little trouble on whether or not the answer is actually a yes or a no, because it sounds as though it is not necessarily a tool that you are leveraging, but the reality is that depending on whatever may be the political policy or direction in the future, blacklisting may become, or negative listing may become a feature of this regulation.
It's a possibility that the legislator has provided, yes. I don't think, I mean, we are not focused at all on this possibility. We are focusing on facilitating data flows. It's the opposite. And you can see this in public documents from the European Commission, for example, a communication which we adopted at the beginning of 2017, which even has the title, Exchanging and Protecting Personal Data in a Globalized World. It's all about facilitating data flows, but with a sufficient level of protection. And that's why we work with many countries around the world to increase convergence of their data protection rules with ours, so they become closer together. That's the best way to deal with data. And as I said at the beginning, this is happening. Many countries are doing exactly that because they see this also as a competitive advantage to update the rules, or for the first time put in place rules. As I mentioned, India is preparing such a law. Indonesia is preparing such a law. Brazil has just adopted such a law. Chile is preparing an update of its law. Argentina, and even the United States is currently has started a debate on a privacy framework. They so far only had sectoral laws, but now they're discussing a horizontal law at federal level. So I think we are not the only ones, and I think that's where we should focus on in harmonizing these rules worldwide. In a globalized world, as for many other policy areas, that's the best way forward, rather than working with blacklists.
Yes, no, agreed. I only giving you a little trouble. All right, so Ralph, again, because we're running a little bit behind time, we want to thank you very, very much for the time and for that of your colleague.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
We do believe that the information that you provided here today has been useful and does provide some clarity to the Chamber and its members. And where necessary that we do receive further questions and queries, then we would hope to continue to work closely with the European Union and the Commission to support our members with those responses. So again, thank you very much.
Happy to do so, and wish you a good continuation of your events. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, so we are drawing to the end of the event. There are 2 items on the agenda that we would like to complete. So one, it relates to some tokens which were provided by the sponsors of today's event. Again, we really would like to continue to thank Cable and Wireless Business as well as JP Morgan for the support that they've provided for this kind of event. Sorry, JP Marshall, if Paul was here, I'd be in trouble. So again, we want to make sure that we thank you because without your support and effort, we wouldn't be able to put on these types of events. And again, we continue to thank the individuals who have come, because I thought for an IT-based event, the turnout actually has been very good. So I think there's a change in wind in terms of the response to the use of IT in the market. So I would like to call, sorry, bear with me. So Maya, you would have given away one already. So Junior from JP. Junior from JP Marshall to give away our first card draw token. Okay, so could Simone Pasmore come to the front? Thank you very much. So, Maya, I'm assuming that you will continue to give away gifts for Cable and Wireless Business, or Jensen, are you taking up this role? Maya? Okay. I hope you heard that, Maya. So.
Michael
Right.
Evans.
Could Michael Evans come to the front? Thank you. And there's one more.
Barbados Steelworks, Mark Hamilton.
So last but not least, from Barbados Steelworks Limited, could Mark Hamachad, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. You left already? Unfortunately, it means that it goes to the pot. Could Ryan Hudson from Light and Power come as well? Okay, so thank you again. So next I would like to call Carlos Wharton, and Carlos would give us the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kolade. I don't need to come up here, right? On behalf of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, first of all, I'd like to thank all involved in terms of the organization of the event. First of all, I would like to thank Senator, the Honorable Kay McConney, for so graciously taking the time to a Wednesday when she's supposed to be in the Senate to come and address us. So, Mr. Taylor, thank you, but also please send our regards to to Senator McConney for taking the time and speaking to our members. Additionally, we would like to thank Adam and his team from the EU delegation to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean for facilitating the discussion with your colleagues from DG Justice in Brussels. And we would wish to thank them for taking their evening out to explain to us GDPR. And I hope that going forward, it sets a platform for direct engagement between the Barbados business community and officials of the European Union on how we can do business together, where and when necessary, cooperate on regulations, but also on the trade promotion front, encourage our businesses to do more cross-border activity with each other. With respect to our sponsors, cable and wireless business, Jensen, thank you very much. Jensen is also a council member, and he has been actively involved in the work of the Chamber. And sir, thank you very much for your kind support, and we look forward to our continued collaboration. Similarly, Mr. Lee, the enforcer, Bruce Lee. Please send my regards to Mr. Paul Marshall of JP Marshalls. Thank you very much again for your kind support. With respect to the facilities, we must give a big thank you to the staff of the Sandals Hotel for the extremely wonderful environment that they've prepared for us. Please send my regards to the management of Sandals. Thank you very much for the support you've been providing to Barbados Chamber of Commerce. Most importantly, the staff of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry Secretariat, we need to single them out. They have been the ones who have been grinding every day on behalf of the members. And please, ladies and gentlemen, give the ladies a round of applause. Please. Ms. Boyer, I can't forget you. As chair of the Digital Societies Committee, you have been willing to serve us. You have convened more meetings than any of your other counterparts of the other committees. And clearly, the effort is paying off. Thank you very much, Ms. Boyer, for your support. And last but not least, I would like to thank all of you for spending the time with us here at the Chamber of Commerce. We welcome your support, and we are very gracious that you have taken your valuable time to have this discussion with us on what we think is critical for Barbados's medium to long-term development path. Without ICT, we are not going to be able to engage the world in a competitive manner. So at the core of it, we are looking to make sure that we're on strong foundations going forward. Thank you very much. I'm being advised. Oh, shoot, Kolade. Sorry, buddy. Kolade. Thank you very much for keeping everything together. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator, thank you. Sorry, Kolade. All right. Okay, and please do have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Thank you.